The Apollo Theater concert footage from 1983 was erased, all 3 hours. Ozzy's crew won't discuss what they saw. One roadie quit and became a priest. What happened backstage that night? The tape exists, or it existed, depending on who you ask and when you ask them. In the basement archives of the Apollo Theater in Manchester, there's a cataloging system listing every performance recorded between 1965 and 1995. Entry number 2847 reads, Ozzy Osbourne, November 12, 1983, 3 hours, 17 minutes, master plus 2 copies. But if you ask for that tape, the archivist will tell you it was damaged in a flood in 1987. The archive flooded in 1989, and the water damage affected the North Storage Room. Tape number 2847 was stored in the South Room. These inconsistencies appear when you start asking questions about that night. Father Michael Cordova doesn't give interviews. He lives in a small parish in rural Ireland now, far from the rock and roll world where he spent 15 years as a touring roadie. His name then was Mike Cord, and in November 1983, he was responsible for Ozzy Osbourne's guitar rig. If you send him a letter, and if you're patient, he might send back a single sheet with a single sentence. Some things are better left in the past where they can't hurt anyone. That's all he said to anyone in 40 years. November 12, 1983. The Apollo Theater. Built in 1938, the venue had a reputation, not among music fans, but among crews. Stagehands who'd worked there for decades would tell you about cold spots that appeared in dressing room 3, about the sound of footsteps on the catwalk when nobody was up there, about how nobody, absolutely nobody, went into the basement storage area alone after dark. Ozzy's tour manager, a man named Frank Geller, who died in 2003, once did give an interview. It was 1997, 14 years after that night. He was drunk. The interviewer was recording, but the recording was lost, or erased, or never existed. The interviewer, a music journalist named Sarah Chen, remembers Frank saying, "We all saw her, every single one of us, and the worst part wasn't seeing her. The worst part was that she saw us." The concert was supposed to start at 8 p.m. It started at 8:47 p.m., 47 minutes late. The official reason given to the crowd was technical difficulties with the sound system, but the sound system was working fine. The delay happened because Ozzy refused to go on stage. He was sitting in dressing room 3, the one with the cold spots, and he wouldn't move. When Frank Geller asked him what was wrong, Ozzy said, "There's someone in here." Frank looked around the room. It was empty except for Ozzy. "There's nobody here, mate," Frank said. Ozzy stared at the corner of the room near the old radiator and said, "Not anymore." The show started late, but it started. The first hour was normal, standard Ozzy performance, high energy, crowd going insane, everything running smoothly. The set list was the usual, opening with some Sabbath classics, moving into solo material, building to the closer. At 9:52 p.m. during the guitar solo in Flying High Again, the lights in the backstage area went out, all of them. The stage lights stayed on, but everything behind the curtain went dark. Emergency lights should have kicked in. They didn't. Mike Cord was standing near the amp racks when it happened. He had a flashlight. Roadies always carry flashlights, and he turned it on. In his later police statement, he said, "I swept the light across the backstage area, and I saw approximately 8 or 9 crew members. Then I saw her. She was standing between Danny and Steve, but they couldn't see her. Only I could. She was maybe 17, 18 years old. She was wearing a white dress, and she was looking directly at me." Danny Reeves, the drum tech, didn't see anything. Neither did Steve Walsh, the lighting director. But Mike wasn't the only one who saw her. Tommy Islington, who was working monitors that night, saw her too. His statement says, "She was behind the drum riser. I thought she was someone's girlfriend who'd snuck backstage, but her clothes were wrong, like old-fashioned wrong, and she wasn't moving. Just standing there, completely still, staring." The lights came back on. 11 seconds of darkness, according to the venue's power logs. When the lights returned, the girl was gone. Mike and Tommy didn't say anything to each other at that moment. They wouldn't compare notes until later, after everything else happened. The second incident occurred at 10:23 p.m. Ozzy was between songs, talking to the crowd, when one of the stage monitors started emitting feedback. Not normal feedback, something else. The audio engineer, a veteran named Patricia Moore, described it in her statement. It wasn't electronic feedback. It was a voice, a girl's voice. She was singing. But there was no microphone input. Nothing was connected that could produce that sound. The singing lasted approximately 15 seconds. The audience didn't seem to notice. They were too loud, too far away. But everyone on stage and immediately backstage heard it. Patricia checked every channel, every input. Everything was functioning normally. The singing had no source. Ozzy heard it too. He stopped mid-sentence, looked directly at the monitor, and then looked backstage. He made eye contact with Frank Geller and mouthed 2 words. Frank later told Sarah Chen what those words were. "She's here." The third incident is where accounts start to diverge in strange ways. What's documented is this. At 10:51 p.m., Ozzy left the stage, not for a planned break, just walked off mid-song. The band kept playing for about 30 seconds before they realized he wasn't coming back. They stopped. The crowd started chanting. Ozzy reappeared after 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He looked pale. He finished the show, but the energy was different. Mechanical. Like he was going through motions. What happened in those 4 minutes and 20 seconds? There are 7 different accounts from 7 different crew members. None of them match completely. They all contradict each other in small but significant ways. Mike Cord says Ozzy went to dressing room 3 and locked the door. Mike stood outside and heard Ozzy talking to someone. A conversation, not a monologue. 2 voices. When Ozzy came out, Mike asked who he'd been talking to. Ozzy said, "The girl who died here." Frank Geller says Ozzy went to the bathroom, and when Frank checked on him, Ozzy was staring at the mirror saying, "I'm sorry," over and over. When Frank asked what he was sorry for, Ozzy said, "For not knowing she was real." Patricia Moore says she followed Ozzy into the wings and saw him standing in front of the back wall, his hand pressed against the bricks, and he was crying. She didn't approach him. She just watched. When he walked back to stage, he walked through the exact spot where Tommy had seen the girl in the white dress. 3 different stories. Same 4 minutes. Same person. Same building. The show ended at 11:04 p.m. Scheduled end time, 11 p.m., 4 minutes late. Except that's not what the venue's time-stamped security logs say. According to those logs, the show ended at 2:17 a.m., 3 hours and 17 minutes later than the scheduled time. But everyone, the crew, the band, even some audience members, insists the show ended just after 11 p.m. They have watches. They have memories. They went to late-night restaurants that close at midnight. The timeline doesn't work both ways. This is where things get genuinely strange. The master recording of the concert, the one that should show exactly what happened and when, was being made by the venue's in-house system. 3 cameras, professional audio feed, standard documentation. The tapes were locked in the control room immediately after the show ended. Standard procedure. The next morning, when Frank Geller asked to review the footage, standard practice for tour documentation, the tapes were blank, not erased, blank, never recorded. But the recording lights had been on, the levels had been monitored. The technical logs showed that recording had occurred. The venue brought in an outside expert to examine the tapes. The expert's report, which exists in the Manchester City Archives, states, "The magnetic tape shows evidence of exposure to extreme electromagnetic interference of unknown origin. The pattern is inconsistent with any known technical malfunction or deliberate erasure method. 2 backup copies had been made during the concert, also blank. Same electromagnetic signature. The crew began comparing notes the next day. That's when they discovered the discrepancies. Some remembered seeing the girl, some didn't. Some remembered Ozzy stopping the show. Some insisted he never left the stage. The timeline confusion emerged. Arguments started. People who'd worked together for years began questioning each other's sanity. Mike Cord quit on November 15th, 3 days after the concert. He didn't give notice. He just stopped showing up. When Frank tracked him down 2 weeks later, Mike said he was done with music, done with touring, done with places where the walls remember things. 6 months later, Mike entered seminary. He's never been to a rock concert since. The Apollo Theater conducted an investigation. Not officially, but the venue manager, a man named Robert Ashford, spent weeks going through the building's history. What he found was this. In 1952, a 17-year-old girl named Catherine Marsh attended a concert at the Apollo. She went missing that night. Her body was found 3 days later in the basement storage area. The cause of death was listed as accidental. She'd fallen and hit her head. But there were inconsistencies in the police report. Witnesses who saw her arguing with someone. A rumor that she'd been pushed. Catherine Marsh had been wearing a white dress the night she died. The case was never solved. Over the decades, it was forgotten. Until Robert Ashford found the old newspaper clippings and police reports. He showed them to Frank Geller. Frank showed them to Ozzy. Ozzy's reaction was never documented, but Frank told Sarah Chen he looked at the photograph of Catherine Marsh and went completely white. He said, "That's her. That's exactly her." Then he asked if we could leave Manchester, like, immediately. The tour continued. Ozzy performed 47 more shows on that European leg, but he never played Manchester again. The Apollo Theater was on the routing for the 1986 tour, the 1991 tour, the 1995 tour. Every time, a last-minute venue change. Different reasons given. Scheduling conflicts, technical limitations, routing logistics. In 2007, a music historian named Dr. James Whitmore got permission to interview Ozzy about the Apollo concert for a documentary about haunted music venues. The interview lasted 4 minutes. Ozzy answered 3 questions with, "I don't remember," and then ended the interview by saying, "Some nights it's better not to remember. That's one of them." The interview footage is available. It's the only documentation that exists from anyone directly involved who's willing to discuss it on camera. But here's what makes it all stranger. In 2015, a bootleg recording surfaced online. Someone in the audience had recorded the Apollo concert on a handheld cassette recorder. The audio quality is terrible, but it's there. The concert sounds normal. No weird feedback, no unusual pauses, no indication of anything strange, just a regular Ozzy concert, except at exactly 10:23 p.m., the same time Patricia Moore reported the singing from the monitors. There's a sound. If you isolate the audio and boost the levels, you can hear it. A girl's voice, singing. The words are unclear, but the melody is distinctive. An audio analyst examined the bootleg. Her report noted, "The vocal element appears on the tape, despite no visible microphone or recording source in audience footage. The frequency signature doesn't match any of the instruments or stage equipment. Source, unexplained." 3 people have contacted the bootleg uploader claiming they recognize the melody. One is a music professor specializing in British folk songs from the 1940s and 50s. She identified it as a traditional lullaby popular in Manchester during the post-war period, the kind of song a teenage girl in 1952 might have known. The Apollo Theater closed in 2019. Not because of ghost stories, but because of structural issues with the foundation. During the final inspection, workers found something in the basement storage area. Behind a wall that was scheduled for demolition, there was a small space, not a room, just a cavity in the brickwork. Inside the cavity was a piece of fabric, white, partially deteriorated. The forensic examination dated it to approximately 1950 to 1955. The fabric was never officially identified as being connected to Catherine Marsh, but the storage area where it was found was the same area where her body had been discovered in 1952. The Apollo building was demolished in 2020. During demolition, 3 workers reported seeing a young woman in a white dress watching from the wings of the stage area. They mentioned it to their supervisor. He told them to stop reading ghost stories and finish the job. Today, there's a parking lot where the Apollo Theater once stood. On November 12th of each year, some people, former crew members, Manchester locals who remember the old stories, music historians interested in the unexplained, leave flowers at the spot where the stage door used to be. Mike Cordova, the priest in Ireland, receives 1 letter every year on November 12th. No return address, just a single sentence. "Do you still remember?" He never responds. But people who know him say that on November 13th, he always performs a special mass for Catherine Marsh, the girl who died in 1952, and for peace, for everyone who saw something that night in 1983 that nobody can explain. The tape doesn't exist. Or it exists and nobody can access it, or it never recorded anything in the first place, or it recorded something that was deliberately erased, or it recorded something that shouldn't exist and needed to be erased. Depending on who you ask and when you ask them, you'll get different answers. The only consistent thing is this. Something happened at the Apollo Theater on November 12, 1983. Multiple witnesses saw it, experienced it, were changed by it, but nobody can prove what it was. And maybe that's the most frightening part, not the ghost if there was a ghost, not the missing time if there was missing time, but the fact that something profound happened to a dozen people, and the only evidence that remains is their stories. And those stories don't even agree with each other. If this story left you with more questions than answers, that's intentional. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that others remember differently? Share in the comments and subscribe for more stories about the unexplained moments in music history.